One night, one drink, one kiss, recorded on the wrong phone. The amber liquid burned down Sarah Chen's throat as she set the empty glass on the mahogany bar with trembling fingers. The wedding reception swirled around her in a blur of champagne toasts and forced laughter, but all she could focus on was the crushing weight of betrayal sitting heavy in her chest. 3 hours ago, she'd discovered her fiancé Michael in the hotel coat closet with her maid of honor, their bodies pressed together in a way that made her stomach turn. "Another whiskey, miss?" The bartender's voice seemed to come from underwater. Sarah nodded, unable to trust her voice. She'd fled the reception venue, supposedly her own engagement party, and ended up at this upscale bar in downtown Seattle, still wearing her pale pink cocktail dress and the engagement ring that now felt like a shackle around her finger. The October rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, creating rivulets that matched the tears she'd finally stopped shedding. "Rough night?" The voice belonged to a man who'd taken the seat beside her. She glanced over to find concerned dark eyes studying her face with surprising gentleness. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more amazing tales like this one. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love connecting with our viewers from around the world. Sarah let out a bitter laugh. "You could say that?" She took another sip of whiskey, savoring the burn. "Just discovered my fiancé has apparently been sampling the wedding party for months. Good thing we found out before the actual ceremony, right?" The stranger winced sympathetically. He was handsome in an understated way, not the flashy, obvious good looks that Michael possessed, but something deeper. Warm eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, dark hair slightly mussed as if he'd been running his hands through it, and a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said, and she could tell he meant it. That's really awful." "Yeah, well, apparently I'm a terrible judge of character." Sarah gestured to the bartender for another round. "Sarah, by the way. Sarah Chen." "Daniel," he replied. Accepting the fresh drink, the bartender slid across the polished wood. "Daniel Martinez, and for what it's worth, it sounds like he's the one with terrible character, not you." Something about his voice, deep and slightly rough around the edges, made her look at him more carefully. He was wearing a simple black sweater and jeans, nothing fancy, but there was something about his presence that commanded attention. Maybe it was the way he listened, really listened, when she spoke. "What about you?" she asked, grateful for the distraction. "What brings you to a hotel bar on a Saturday night? Please don't tell me you're here for another wedding." Daniel chuckled, a warm sound that made something flutter in her chest despite everything. "Business meeting, actually. Flew in from Portland this morning. Meeting doesn't happen until Monday, so I'm stuck in Seattle for the weekend." "Portland? I love Portland. What kind of business?" "Boring tech stuff," he said with a self-deprecating smile. "Nothing as interesting as, well, whatever it is you do when you're not dealing with cheating fiancés." "Marketing director for a non-profit that works with homeless youth," Sarah said, surprised to find herself smiling for the first time all evening, so also not particularly glamorous. "Are you kidding? That's amazing. What kind of work do you do with them?" As Sarah found herself explaining her job, the outreach programs, the safe houses they'd helped establish, the job training initiatives, she noticed that Daniel asked thoughtful questions, really engaging with what she was telling him. It was such a stark contrast to Michael, who'd always glazed over whenever she talked about work, more interested in discussing his latest real estate deals. The conversation flowed easier than it should have, given the circumstances. They talked about Seattle, about their favorite books, about the ridiculous price of coffee in the city. Daniel had traveled extensively, and his stories about getting lost in Tokyo's subway system and accidentally ordering sheep's brain in Morocco had her laughing until her sides hurt. "I can't believe I'm laughing," she said, wiping tears from her eyes, but these were good tears, for once. "A few hours ago I thought my life was over." "Life's funny that way," Daniel said, his expression growing more serious. "Sometimes the worst moments lead to unexpected discoveries." There was something in his tone that made her pulse quicken. The bar had grown quieter around them, the business crowd thinning out as the evening wore on. The soft jazz music and dim lighting created an intimate bubble around their corner of the bar. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said, emboldened by the whiskey and his easy presence. "Shoot. Do you believe in signs, like universe-sent signs?" Daniel tilted his head, considering. What kind of signs are we talking about? The kind where your entire life implodes in the span of an hour, and then you meet a stranger who makes you remember that there are still good people in the world. The air between them shifted, becoming charged with possibility. Daniel's eyes darkened as he looked at her, and Sarah felt her breath catch. "Sarah," he said softly, "I don't want to take advantage of a vulnerable moment." "You're not," she said quickly. "Trust me, I know the difference between someone taking advantage and someone being genuinely kind. And you." She reached out, her fingers brushing against his on the bar. "You're the first good thing that's happened to me in a very long time." Daniel's hand turned over, capturing her fingers in his warm palm. "You're sure?" Instead of answering with words, Sarah leaned forward and kissed him. It was soft at first, tentative, but when he responded with equal gentleness, she deepened it. He tasted like whiskey and possibility, and for the first time all evening, her heart felt light instead of shattered. When they finally broke apart, both breathing harder, Daniel's forehead rested against hers. "My hotel room is upstairs," he said quietly. "I know," Sarah whispered back. "Mine too. Actually, different room, obviously." "Obviously," he said with a small smile. So, she agreed, sliding off the bar stool. The elevator ride to the 15th floor was charged with anticipation. They didn't speak, but Daniel's hand found hers, their fingers intertwined. When the doors opened, they turned left toward his room, both understanding without words that this was where the night was leading. Daniel's room was a standard business suite, neat and impersonal, except for his laptop open on the desk and a half-read book on the nightstand. He'd barely closed the door behind them before Sarah was in his arms again, this time with more urgency. "Are you sure about this?" he murmured against her lips. "I'm sure," she said, and meant it. For the first time in months, she felt like herself again, not Michael's accommodating fiancé, not the woman who'd been walking on eggshells trying to make a relationship work with someone who clearly didn't value her. Just Sarah, making a choice for herself. What followed was tender and passionate, filled with the kind of connection she'd forgotten was possible. Daniel was attentive and generous, taking his time with her in a way that made her feel cherished rather than conquered. When they finally lay tangled together afterward, Sarah felt more at peace than she had in years. "I should probably head back to my room," she said eventually, though she made no move to leave the warmth of his arms. "You should," Daniel agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "But you don't have to. Not yet." They dozed fitfully, waking periodically to reach for each other again. It was nearly dawn when Sarah finally slipped from the bed, gathering her scattered clothes. Daniel watched her dress with sleepy, satisfied eyes. "This was—" she began, then stopped, unsure how to finish. "Perfect," he said simply. "This was perfect." She leaned down to kiss him goodbye, soft and lingering. "Thank you," she whispered, "for reminding me that I deserve better." "You do," he said seriously. "Don't ever forget that." Sarah slipped out of his room and padded down the carpeted hallway to her own, her heart feeling lighter than it had in months. She fell asleep, just as the sun began to peek through the curtains, a small smile on her lips. She woke up late Sunday morning to 17 missed calls from Michael and a string of increasingly frantic text messages. Apparently, her disappearance from their engagement party had caused quite a stir. Sarah deleted them all without reading most of them, then spent the day wandering Pike Place Market, buying herself flowers and eating her way through various food stalls. For the first time in years, she was alone and completely content with her own company. By Sunday evening, she'd made several decisions. She was going to break up with Michael officially. No dramatic confrontations, no attempts to work things out. She was going to keep the apartment they'd shared, since it was in her name anyway, and she was going to focus on herself and her work for a while. Maybe travel a bit, something Michael had always discouraged because it interfered with his social calendar. She'd also decided not to try to contact Daniel. What they'd shared had been beautiful, precisely because it was contained. One perfect night that reminded her of her own worth. She didn't need it to be anything more than that. Monday morning arrived grey and drizzly, typical Seattle October weather. Sarah, dressed carefully for work in a navy blazer and matching pants, armor for the difficult conversation she knew she'd have to have with Michael when he inevitably showed up at her office. She'd learned to read his patterns over their 3-year relationship, and she knew he'd try the public confrontation route first, hoping to pressure her into compliance. The offices of Seattle Youth Outreach occupied the 3rd floor of a renovated warehouse in the Capitol Hill neighborhood. It wasn't glamorous. Mismatched furniture, industrial lighting, and walls covered with success stories from the teens they'd helped. But Sarah loved the energy of the place. Her colleagues were passionate, dedicated people who'd chosen meaningful work over big paychecks. And coming in Monday morning, she felt like she was returning to herself after months of trying to be someone else. Sarah, her assistant Jamie, practically bounced over to her desk. How was the engagement party? I want to hear everything. Sarah's smile faltered slightly. Actually, there's been a change of plans on that front. Jamie's expression shifted to concern. Oh no. What happened? Let's just say I discovered some things about Michael that made me realize we weren't as compatible as I thought. Sarah hung up her jacket and turned on her computer. I'll fill you in later, but right now I need to catch up on what I missed Friday. Well, you're going to want to look at the Henderson Foundation email first, Jamie said, her tone shifting to excitement. They want to meet with you about a potential major grant. We're talking life-changing money for the program. Sarah's eyebrows rose. The Henderson Foundation was legendary in non-profit circles, a private foundation established by tech billionaire Marcus Henderson that had given away hundreds of millions of dollars to education and social programs. Getting their attention was like winning the lottery. How major are we talking? Sarah asked, clicking open the email. 7 figures major, Jamie whispered, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. The preliminary meeting is set for Wednesday if you can make it. Downtown office building, very official. Sarah scanned the email, her heart racing. This was the kind of opportunity that came along once in a career, if ever. The grant money could fund their housing program for the next 5 years, allow them to expand into job training and mental health services, maybe even open a second location. Of course I can make it, she said. This is incredible, Jamie. How did they even hear about us? Apparently someone forwarded them the article that ran in the Seattle Times last month, the one about our success rates. They were impressed by the data on long-term outcomes. Sarah spent the morning diving back into work, grateful for the distraction. She was reviewing case files when her phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Sarah, we need to talk. I'm coming by your office at lunch. She stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, Don't. There's nothing to discuss. I'll have your things packed and ready for pickup by the weekend. Her phone immediately rang. Michael's name flashed on the screen, but she let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. And again. Finally, she answered. What, Michael? Sarah, baby, don't be like this. I know you're upset, but we can work through this. What you saw, it wasn't what you think. Sarah almost laughed at the predictability of his response. It wasn't what I think? Michael, I saw you with your tongue down Jessica's throat while she had her hand down your pants. In what universe is that not exactly what I think it is? We'd been drinking, it didn't mean anything. She came on to me, and I was weak for a moment. But it's you I love. It's you I want to marry. No, Sarah said firmly. It's not just one moment, Michael. Jamie told me she saw you leaving lunch with Jessica 3 weeks ago, looking very cozy. And now that I'm thinking clearly, there have been signs for months. The late meetings, the secretive phone calls, the way you've been pulling away from me physically and emotionally. Sarah, please. I'm done, Michael. I've already talked to my dad about finding you a good divorce attorney for when you need one in the future, because clearly fidelity isn't your strong suit. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. She hung up and immediately blocked his number, then did the same with Jessica's. Her hands were shaking slightly, but she felt lighter, like she'd been carrying a weight she hadn't realized was there. The rest of Monday and Tuesday passed in a blur of preparation for the Henderson Foundation meeting. Sarah researched everything she could find about the foundation, their giving priorities, and their application process. She prepared detailed presentations on their current programs, success metrics, and expansion plans. This was too important to leave anything to chance. Wednesday morning, she dressed in her best suit, a charcoal grey Banana Republic number she'd bought for a conference last year, and took extra time with her hair and makeup. First impressions mattered, especially when dealing with people who had the power to transform her organization overnight. The Henderson Foundation offices occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming downtown high-rise with views of Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains. Sarah arrived 15 minutes early and spent the time in the marble-clad lobby reviewing her notes and trying to calm her nerves. Ms. Chen, a woman in an expensive-looking dress, approached her. "I'm Catherine Williams, Mr. Henderson's assistant. He's ready to see you now." Sarah followed Catherine into an elevator that required a key card to access the upper floors. The doors opened to reveal a reception area that looked more like a luxury hotel lobby than an office, all warm wood, tasteful artwork, and understated elegance. "Right this way," Catherine said, leading her down a hallway lined with floor-to-ceiling windows. They stopped in front of a heavy wooden door. Catherine knocked once, then opened it without waiting for a response. "Mr. Henderson, this is Sarah Chen from Seattle Youth Outreach." Sarah stepped into the office and immediately felt her breath catch. Behind the massive desk, rising to greet her with a warm smile, was Daniel. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt sideways. Daniel, her Daniel from Saturday night, was Marcus Henderson, the tech billionaire whose foundation she was here to petition for funding. He was wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit instead of jeans and a sweater. His hair was styled rather than mussed, and he radiated the kind of confident authority that came with serious money and power. But those were definitely the same warm brown eyes that had looked at her with such tenderness 3 nights ago. "Ms. Chen," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "please, have a seat." Sarah's mind raced as she settled into the leather chair across from his desk. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. The man she'd spent Saturday night with, the man who'd made love to her with such care and attention, was one of the richest people in the Pacific Northwest. "Thank you for taking the time to meet with me, Mr. Henderson," she managed to say, proud that her voice came out steady. "Please call me Marcus," he said, and she caught the slight emphasis on the name. "I've been very impressed with the work your organization has been doing. The statistics on your housing program are particularly compelling." Sarah forced herself to focus on why she was here. Whatever was happening between them personally, her kids needed this grant. The teens sleeping in doorways and under bridges didn't care about her complicated love life. "Thank you," she said, finding her footing. "We've worked hard to develop evidence-based programs that actually create lasting change. Too many organizations in this space focus on short-term interventions that don't address root causes." She launched into her presentation, pulling out charts and graphs that showed their success rates, their cost-effectiveness compared to other programs, and their plans for expansion. Despite her shock at discovering Daniel's real identity, she found herself hitting her stride, talking passionately about the work that meant everything to her. Marcus, Daniel, listened intently, asking thoughtful questions that showed he'd done his homework on both her organization and the broader issues of youth homelessness. His questions were sharp but not hostile, probing but not dismissive. It was clear he took the work seriously. "The job training component is particularly interesting," he said, leaning back in his chair. "What kind of partnerships have you developed with local employers?" "We've built relationships with about 30 businesses around the city," Sarah said, grateful to be on familiar ground. "Everything from restaurants to tech startups to construction companies. The key is finding employers who are willing to take a chance on kids with non-traditional backgrounds and then providing ongoing support to make sure both sides succeed." "That's smart," Marcus said, making a note. "Sustainable change requires buy-in from the whole community." They talked for nearly an hour, and despite the surreal circumstances, Sarah found herself enjoying the conversation. Marcus asked the right questions, understood the complexities of the work, and seemed genuinely committed to funding programs that worked rather than just programs that sounded good. Finally, He set down his pen and looked directly at her. "Ms. Chen, I'm prepared to offer Seattle Youth Outreach a 3-year grant of $8 million to expand your programs as outlined in your proposal." Sarah's jaw dropped. It was more than she'd dared to hope for, enough to transform everything they were trying to do. That's incredible," she said. "Thank you so much. You have no idea what this means to our kids." "Actually, I think I do," Marcus said quietly. "I was homeless for a period when I was 15. Ended up in Seattle, actually, sleeping in doorways and shelters. I know what it's like to feel like the whole world has written you off." Sarah stared at him. This was information that wasn't in any of the profiles she'd read about Marcus Henderson. His official biography talked about growing up in Portland, getting scholarship to MIT, starting his first company at 22. "I don't talk about it publicly," he continued, as if reading her thoughts, "but it's why I care so much about funding programs that actually work. I've seen too many organizations that are more interested in feeling good about themselves than in creating real change." "And you think we're different?" "I know you're different. Your data proves it, but more than that, the way you talk about the kids. It's clear this isn't just a job for you." They spent another few minutes discussing logistics and paperwork, but Sarah barely heard the details. Her mind was reeling not just from the grant, but from this new understanding of who Marcus Henderson really was. Finally, Catherine appeared to remind Marcus of his next appointment. Sarah gathered her materials and stood to leave, still feeling like she was in a dream. "Ms. Chen," Marcus said as she reached the door, "would you be free for dinner tomorrow evening? I'd like to discuss some ideas I have for potential program expansions." Sarah turned back to look at him. His expression was carefully professional, but she could see something else in his eyes, the same warmth that had drawn her to Daniel in the hotel bar. "Yes," she said, "I'm free." "Wonderful. Catherine will send you the details." Sarah made it to the elevator before her legs started to shake. In the span of an hour, her professional life had been transformed, and her personal life had been thrown into complete chaos. She rode down to the lobby in a daze, trying to process what had just happened. Outside on the sidewalk, the Seattle drizzle immediately dampened her hair and jacket, but she barely noticed. She walked aimlessly for several blocks, her mind spinning with questions. Why had Marcus, Daniel, been at that hotel bar Saturday night? Had he known who she was? Was their meeting really a coincidence, or had it been orchestrated somehow? The more she thought about it, the more uncomfortable she became. She'd poured her heart out to him that night, told him about her job, her broken engagement, her vulnerabilities. If he'd known who she was, if he'd researched her before the grant meeting. Sarah stopped walking abruptly, right in the middle of the crowded sidewalk. People flowed around her, but she stood frozen as a horrible thought occurred to her. What if Saturday night hadn't been a coincidence at all? What if Marcus Henderson had orchestrated their meeting as some kind of test or evaluation? The more she considered it, the more plausible it seemed. He would have received her grant application weeks ago. He could have easily researched her, found out about her engagement party, known she'd be at that hotel. Maybe the whole thing had been an elaborate setup to see what kind of person she really was. The thought made her physically ill. She'd been so vulnerable with him, so open and trusting. The connection she'd felt, the tenderness they'd shared, had it all been performance on his part? Sarah found herself walking faster, driven by a growing anger. By the time she reached her office, she was furious, at Marcus for potentially manipulating her, at herself for being so naive, and at the universe for making something that had felt so real turn out to be so complicated. "Sarah," Jamie jumped up as she walked in. "How did the meeting go? You look weird. Are you okay?" "The meeting was fine," Sarah said tersely. "We got the grant. $8 million over 3 years. Jamie's shriek of excitement brought half the office running. Sarah endured the congratulations and excited planning sessions, but her heart wasn't in it. She kept thinking about Saturday night, analyzing every moment, every word, looking for signs that Daniel, Marcus, had been playing a role. The worst part was that she couldn't be sure. Their conversation had felt so natural, so unguarded. But then again, didn't that just prove how good an actor he was? You didn't become a billionaire by age 35 without being able to read people and tell them what they wanted to hear. That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment with a glass of wine and her laptop, doing the kind of deep internet research she should have done before the meeting. What she found only made her feel worse. Marcus Henderson's public persona was impressive, but impersonal. Graduated summa cum laude from MIT with degrees in computer science and business, started his first company, a software firm, at 22 and sold it for $50 million 3 years later. His current company, Henderson Technologies, was a major player in cloud computing and cybersecurity. Net worth estimated at $2 billion. But personal details were scarce. He kept a low profile socially, didn't seem to date anyone publicly, and avoided the party circuit that most young billionaires gravitated toward. The homeless background he'd mentioned wasn't anywhere in his official biography. There was one photo from a charity gala last year where he looked uncomfortable in his tuxedo, standing slightly apart from the other attendees. But mostly, he seemed to avoid publicity altogether. Sarah closed her laptop, feeling more confused than ever. Nothing she'd found suggested he was the kind of person who would orchestrate an elaborate seduction for business purposes. But then again, the most successful manipulators were often the ones you never suspected. Thursday morning brought an email from Catherine with details about dinner, a quiet restaurant in Capitol Hill, 7 o'clock. Sarah stared at the message for a long time, debating whether to go at all. The professional side of her knew she should. This grant represented the future of her organization, and if Marcus Henderson had ideas for additional funding or partnerships, she owed it to her kids to hear him out. But personally, the thought of sitting across from him pretending that Saturday night hadn't happened made her stomach churn. In the end, duty won out. Sarah spent extra time getting ready, choosing a simple black dress that was professional but flattering, and arrived at the restaurant exactly on time. Marcus was already there, seated at a corner table that offered privacy, without being obviously romantic. He stood when he saw her, and for a moment, Sarah felt the same flutter she'd experienced in the hotel bar. He looked good, the expensive suit replaced with dark jeans and a button-down shirt that made him seem more approachable. "Sarah," he said warmly, "thank you for coming." "Of course," she replied, sitting across from him. "I'm curious to hear about these expansion ideas you mentioned." If Marcus noticed her cooler tone, he didn't comment on it. Instead, he launched into a discussion of potential programs, a partnership with local colleges to provide educational opportunities, a mentorship program connecting homeless youth with successful professionals, even the possibility of opening a second location in Portland. His ideas were thoughtful and well-researched, clearly the result of serious consideration rather than idle speculation. Despite her suspicions about his motives, Sarah found herself getting excited about the possibilities. "The mentorship program especially interests me," Marcus said as their entrees arrived. "I think there's something powerful about connecting kids who feel invisible with adults who faced similar challenges." "You're thinking about your own experience," Sarah said, studying his face. "Partly, yes. I was lucky. I had one teacher who refused to give up on me, who helped me get back on track. But I know how easily it could have gone the other way." "What happened? How did you end up homeless at 15? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, cutting his salmon with more precision than necessary. "My parents died in a car accident when I was 14. I went to live with my aunt and uncle in Portland, but my uncle... Let's just say he had problems with alcohol and anger management. After about 6 months, I decided the streets were safer." Sarah felt her anger beginning to soften despite herself. There was pain in his voice, old and deep, and she recognized the careful way he spoke about it, the tone of someone who'd learned to share just enough to be honest without reopening old wounds. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "It was a long time ago. And like I said, I was lucky. Eventually, a social worker connected me with a foster family who actually cared, helped me get back in school, supported me when I got the scholarship to MIT. Is that why you don't talk about it publicly? Too personal?" Marcus looked up from his plate, meeting her eyes directly. "Partly. But also because I've learned that some people hear a story like that and think it gives them license to judge how I use my money, or that it makes me some kind of inspiration porn. I prefer to let my foundation's work speak for itself. They continued talking throughout dinner, the conversation gradually becoming more personal and less formal. Marcus told her about his early struggles in tech, the failed ventures that preceded his successes, the loneliness that came with sudden wealth. Sarah found herself sharing more about her work, her passion for social justice, the challenges of running a non-profit in a city where housing costs kept pushing the problem further out of sight. By the time dessert arrived, the tension she'd been carrying had largely dissolved. Whatever his motivations, Marcus clearly cared deeply about the work her organization was doing, and the way he listened, the questions he asked, reminded her strongly of Daniel from Saturday night. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said as Marcus paid the check. "Of course." "Saturday night, in the hotel bar, did you know who I was?" Marcus went very still. "What do you mean? I mean, did you orchestrate that meeting somehow, as part of evaluating me for the grant?" For a moment, Marcus looked genuinely shocked. Then his expression shifted to something that might have been hurt. "Sarah, no, absolutely not. I was at that hotel because I had a meeting with potential investors on Monday morning. I went to the bar because I'd had a terrible day and wanted a drink. Meeting you was..." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Meeting you was the best thing that had happened to me in a very long time, but it had nothing to do with business." "But you must have put it together. When you saw my name on the grant application..." "I saw your name on the application 3 weeks ago," Marcus interrupted, "but Sarah Chen is not exactly an uncommon name, and non-profit directors don't usually include photos in their grant materials. I had no idea you were the same person until you walked into my office yesterday." Sarah studied his face, looking for any sign of deception, but his eyes were steady, his expression open and slightly wounded. "You have to understand," she said slowly, "from my perspective, it looks incredibly suspicious. I tell a stranger my whole life story, sleep with him, and then 3 days later he offers my organization nearly $3 million. I understand why you'd be suspicious," Marcus said, "but Sarah, I would never manipulate someone that way. What happened between us Saturday night was real for me, completely real." Something in his voice made her believe him, despite her lingering doubts. "So what happens now?" "Now." Marcus signaled for the waiter to bring their coats. "Now we figure out how to navigate a very complicated situation." They walked out of the restaurant together, the October air crisp and clear for once. Seattle stretched out around them, the city lights reflecting off the waters of Puget Sound in the distance. "I should probably get home," Sarah said when they reached the sidewalk. "Sarah, wait." Marcus caught her arm gently. "Can I see you again? Not for business. Not about the grant or the foundation, just as Daniel and Sarah." The way he said it, using the name he'd given her that first night, made her heart skip. But the complications loomed large in her mind. "Marcus, I don't know if that's a good idea. The power dynamic, the money, the grant is already approved," he said. "The paperwork will be finalized by the end of the week, regardless of what happens between us personally. Your organization's funding isn't contingent on anything other than the good work you're already doing. But people will talk. If anyone finds out that Saturday night happened, let them talk," Marcus said fiercely. "Sarah, I haven't felt this way about anyone in years, maybe ever. Are we really going to let other people's opinions dictate whether we explore this?" Sarah looked at him standing there under the streetlight, his hands in his pockets, his expression hopeful and vulnerable. This was Daniel, the man who'd listened to her pour her heart out and responded with such kindness. But he was also Marcus Henderson, whose wealth and influence could change everything about her life, for better or worse. "I need time to think," she said finally. "Of course, take all the time you need." Marcus hailed a taxi for her, holding the door while she slid into the back seat. As the cab pulled away, Sarah watched him through the rear window, her solitary figure growing smaller in the distance. That night she lay awake replaying every moment of their conversation, every nuance of his expression. Her rational mind kept throwing up warning flags, the complications, The potential for gossip, the way dating someone that wealthy would change everything about her life. But her heart kept returning to Saturday night, to the connection they'd shared, to the way he'd made her feel seen and valued. Friday passed in a blur of work and congratulations from colleagues and board members who'd heard about the Henderson Foundation grant. Sarah threw herself into planning meetings and program development, grateful for the distraction. Saturday afternoon, she was cleaning her apartment when her doorbell rang. Sarah opened the door to find a delivery man holding an enormous bouquet of flowers, not the usual roses or lilies, but a carefully arranged mix of wildflowers and herbs that looked like they'd been gathered from a mountain meadow. The card read, "Thank you for reminding me that some of the best things in life can't be planned or purchased. D." Sarah held the card for a long time, breathing in the scent of lavender and rosemary. It was exactly the kind of gesture Daniel would make, thoughtful, personal, not flashy or expensive, despite his obvious ability to afford flashy and expensive. That evening, she found herself walking through Pike Place Market, not really shopping but just enjoying the energy of the place. She was examining handmade jewelry at one of the craft stores when a familiar voice said her name. Sarah. She turned to find Marcus approaching, looking more casual than she'd ever seen him in worn jeans and a Seattle Mariners t-shirt. His hair was mussed by the wind and he was carrying a paper bag that smelled deliciously of fresh bread. "Hi," she said, suddenly self-conscious. "Hi, flower shopping." He nodded toward the bouquet she was still carrying. "These are from you, actually. They're beautiful, thank you." Marcus smiled, looking pleased. "I'm glad you like them. I wasn't sure wildflowers were your style, but they seemed more honest than roses." "More honest?" "Less predictable. Less like something you send because you're supposed to." They stood there for a moment, the comfortable awkwardness of two people navigating uncharted territory. Around them, the market bustled with Saturday afternoon energy, families with children, tourists taking photos, vendors calling out their wares. "What's in the bag?" Sarah asked. "Sourdough from the bread guy and some of that smoked salmon you can only get here. I was planning to have a very sophisticated dinner of carbs and fish while watching baseball." Marcus paused. "You're welcome to join me if you want. No pressure, no agenda, just food and possibly terrible commentary on the Mariners' pitching situation." Sarah looked at him, really looked. This wasn't Marcus Henderson, the billionaire, making a calculated move. This was Daniel, the man who'd spent Saturday evening making her laugh when she thought her world was ending. "Okay," she said, "but I have opinions about baseball that you might not appreciate." Even better. Marcus's apartment was in a converted warehouse building in Belltown, with exposed brick walls and enormous windows that overlooked Elliott Bay. It was tastefully furnished but not ostentatious. Comfortable couches, well-stocked bookshelves, art that looked chosen for personal meaning rather than investment value. "This is nice," Sarah said, gravitating toward the windows and the view of ferries crossing the water. "Thanks. I bought it mostly for the view. There's something about watching the water that helps me think." They prepared dinner together, an easy domesticity that surprised them both. Marcus proved to be a competent cook, and Sarah found herself relaxing as they worked side by side, assembling sandwiches and debating the relative merits of different mustards. The baseball game turned out to be a blowout, which gave them plenty of opportunity to talk about other things. Marcus told her about his travels, his work, the loneliness that came with success. Sarah shared stories from her job, her dreams of expanding their programs, her complicated relationship with her traditional Chinese parents who still didn't quite understand why she'd chosen non-profit work over a more lucrative career. "They love me," she said, curled up on one end of his couch with her feet tucked under her. "But they worry that I'm not practical enough. My mom keeps sending me articles about women my age who've started successful businesses or married well." "What about Michael? Did they approve of him?" Sarah made a face. "They loved Michael. He was exactly what they wanted for me. Stable, successful, conventional. The fact that he was also boring and ultimately unfaithful was less important than the fact that he had a good job and nice manners. Their daughter is smart, passionate, and dedicated to making the world better," Marcus said quietly. "If they can't see how extraordinary that is, that's their loss." Something in his tone made Sarah look at him more closely. "What about your family? Or foster family, I mean?" "The Kowalskis," Marcus said with a warm smile. "They're amazing people, still live in Portland, still act like I'm their actual son even though I was only with them for 3 years. They're probably the reason I turned out even halfway decent. Do you see them often? Not as much as I should. Success has a way of creating distance, even when you don't want it to. They talked until late into the evening, the conversation ranging from serious to silly and back again. When Sarah finally looked at her watch, she was surprised to find it was nearly midnight. "I should go," she said reluctantly. "You should," Marcus agreed, but made no move to get up from the couch. This was nice. Really nice. It was. Sarah gathered her things slowly, both of them clearly reluctant for the evening to end. At the door, Marcus helped her into her jacket, his hands lingering on her shoulders. "Sarah," he said quietly. "Yeah? I know this is complicated. I know there are a lot of reasons why we should probably keep things professional, but I don't want to. I like who I am when I'm with you." Sarah looked up into his eyes, seeing the same vulnerability there that she'd glimpsed that first night in the hotel bar. "I like who I am when I'm with you too." The kiss that followed was soft and tentative at first, then deeper as they both gave in to the attraction that had been simmering between them all evening. When they finally broke apart, both breathing harder, Sarah rested her forehead against his chest. "So what do we do now?" she whispered. "Now we take it slow," Marcus said, his arms tightening around her. "We figure it out as we go. No pressure, no expectations, just us." "Just us," Sarah repeated, liking the sound of it. The next few weeks fell into a pattern that surprised them both with its normalcy. Marcus would text her during the day, funny observations about meetings, questions about her work, photos of interesting things he saw around the city. Sarah found herself looking forward to his messages, especially the ones that came with no agenda other than making her smile. They had dinner together twice more, always at quiet places where they could talk without interruption. Marcus proved to be excellent company, funny, thoughtful, surprisingly well-read for someone who'd spent most of his adult life building technology companies. Sarah found herself sharing things she rarely talked about, her struggles with imposter syndrome in her job, her complicated feelings about success and money, her fears about never finding someone who truly understood her passions. "I spent 3 years with Michael trying to make myself smaller," she told Marcus over dinner at a tiny Vietnamese restaurant in the International District. "He never said I was too intense or too focused on work, but I could tell it bothered him. Like my caring so much about homeless kids somehow reflected poorly on him." "That says everything about him and nothing about you," Marcus said firmly. "Your passion is one of the most attractive things about you. You say that now, but wait until I drag you to a fundraiser and spend the whole evening talking about housing policy." "Try me," Marcus said with a grin. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Sarah's organization was hosting their annual benefit gala in early November, and she needed a date. She'd been dreading going alone, especially since several of her colleagues would be there with their spouses and partners. "It's not exactly fun," she warned Marcus when she asked him. "Lot of speeches, mediocre rubber chicken dinner, and a silent auction featuring pottery made by well-meaning board members." "Sounds perfect," Marcus said. "I haven't been to a good rubber chicken dinner in months." The night of the gala, Sarah stood in front of her bedroom mirror, second-guessing her dress choice for the 10th time. She'd finally settled on a deep blue cocktail dress that was elegant but not too formal, professional but still feminine. Her hair was pulled back in a low chignon, and she'd splurged on professional makeup for the occasion. When Marcus arrived to pick her up, the look in his eyes told her she'd chosen well. "You look incredible," he said, leaning in to kiss her cheek carefully so as not to disturb her lipstick. "You clean up pretty well yourself," she replied, admiring his perfectly tailored tuxedo. The gala was being held at the downtown Hilton, in a ballroom that had been transformed with soft lighting and carefully arranged flowers. Sarah felt a flutter of nerves as they approached the entrance. This would be the first time she'd appeared publicly with Marcus, and while most people probably wouldn't recognize him, some would. "You okay?" Marcus asked, sensing her tension. "Just nervous about the speech I have to give later." "You'll be great," he said, squeezing her hand. "Just talk about the work the way you talk to me about it. Your passion is infectious." The evening started well. Marcus was charming and engaged, asking thoughtful questions about the organization's work and listening intently to the answers. He bid enthusiastically on several silent auction items, including a weekend at a bed and breakfast in the San Juan Islands and a signed Mariners jersey. Sarah was beginning to relax when she spotted a familiar figure across the room. Michael was there, looking handsome in his tuxedo and sporting a blonde woman on his arm, who was definitely not Jessica. "Shit," Sarah muttered under her breath. "What?" Marcus followed her gaze and immediately understood. "Ah, the ex-fiancé. I can't believe he has the nerve to show up here. He never cared about my work when we were together. Maybe he's trying to show support now that you're not together." Sarah gave Marcus a look. "You're too generous. Trust me, Michael only does things that benefit Michael." As if summoned by their conversation, Michael began making his way across the room toward them, the blonde trailing behind him, looking slightly confused. "Sarah." Michael's smile was bright and artificial. "You look amazing. I'm so glad to see you're doing well." "Michael," Sarah replied coolly, "what are you doing here?" "Supporting a good cause, of course. This is Brittany, by the way. Brittany, this is Sarah, the one I told you about." Brittany extended a manicured hand with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Nice to meet you. Michael's told me so much about your little charity." Sarah felt Marcus stiffen slightly beside her at the dismissive tone, but she kept her own expression neutral. "It's nice to meet you too. And this is Marcus Henderson." Recognition flashed in Michael's eyes as he processed the name, followed quickly by calculation. "Marcus Henderson, of Henderson Technologies." "That's right," Marcus replied with a polite but distant smile. "Wow, Sarah, you've certainly moved up in the world," Michael said, his tone suggesting this was not entirely a compliment. Before Sarah could respond, the lights dimmed and the evening's program began. They made their way to their assigned table, Marcus's hand warm and steady on the small of Sarah's back. "Sorry about that," Sarah whispered as they took their seats. "Nothing to apologize for," Marcus murmured back, "though I have to say you have excellent taste in ex-fiancés to dump." Despite her annoyance with Michael, Sarah found herself smiling. The dinner portion of the evening passed pleasantly. Their table included several board members and major donors, and Marcus fit in seamlessly, asking intelligent questions and offering thoughtful insights about the challenges of addressing homelessness in rapidly gentrifying cities. When it came time for Sarah to give her speech, she felt calmer than she had all evening. She spoke about the young people they'd served that year, the successes and the heartbreaks, the importance of treating homeless youth as whole people with potential rather than problems to be managed. "Every young person who comes to us has a story," she said, looking out at the audience of donors and supporters. "Some of those stories are tragic, some are inspiring, and all of them are complicated. But what they have in common is potential, the potential to heal, to grow, to contribute to their communities in ways we might never have imagined." She told the story of Maria, a 17-year-old who'd aged out of foster care and been living in her car when she found Seattle Youth Outreach. With stable housing and job training, Maria was now enrolled in community college and working part-time as a veterinary assistant. Maria didn't need saving, Sarah concluded. She needed support and opportunity, and someone to believe in her potential. That's what your donations make possible, not charity, but investment in human potential. The applause was warm and sustained, and Sarah felt a rush of satisfaction as she made her way back to her table. Marcus stood to pull out her chair, his eyes bright with pride. "That was incredible," he said quietly. "You're incredible." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations and conversations with donors. Sarah was in her element, talking passionately about their programs and future plans. Marcus stayed close, sometimes contributing to the conversations, but mostly watching her with obvious admiration. They were preparing to leave when Michael appeared at their table again, this time without Brittany. "Sarah, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Sarah glanced at Marcus, who gave her a subtle nod. "I'll be right back," she told him. Michael led her to a quiet corner near the silent auction tables. "You look happy," he said without preamble. "I am happy." Good, I'm glad. I know I hurt you and I'm sorry about that. Really sorry. Sarah studied his face, surprised by what seemed like genuine remorse. Thank you, I appreciate you saying that. Is it serious? With Henderson? That's not really any of your business, Michael. I know, it's just... Be careful, okay? Men like that, with that kind of money and power, they're used to getting what they want and they don't always care about collateral damage. Sarah felt a flash of anger. You don't get to do this. You don't get to cheat on me and then warn me about other men's character. You're right, Michael said quickly. I'm sorry, I still care about you, Sarah. I want you to be happy. Then be happy for me, Sarah said firmly, and maybe work on being a better person yourself. She turned and walked back to Marcus, who was settling their coats over his arm. Everything okay? He asked. Everything's fine, Sarah said, slipping her hand into his. Let's go home. In the taxi back to Sarah's apartment, she found herself replaying the evening, the satisfaction of her speech, the way Marcus had fit so naturally into her world, even the strange encounter with Michael. Thank you for coming tonight, she said as the cab pulled up to her building. I know galas aren't exactly exciting. Are you kidding? I got to watch you in your element, surrounded by people who clearly adore and respect you. It was better than any entertainment I could have paid for. Sarah felt her heart flutter at the warmth in his voice. Do you want to come up? I promise I have better wine than whatever they were serving at the hotel. Marcus's eyes darkened slightly. I'd like that. Sarah's apartment was modest but cozy, filled with books and plants and photographs from her travels. Marcus moved around the space appreciatively while Sarah opened a bottle of wine. This is exactly what I would have expected, he said, examining her bookshelf. Is that good or bad? It's perfect. It's completely you, thoughtful, warm, a little eclectic. He pulled out a worn paperback copy of Barbara Ehrenreich's Nickel and Dimed. Required reading for someone in your field. Required reading for anyone who wants to understand why poverty isn't a personal failing, Sarah said, handing him a glass of wine. They settled on her couch, Sarah kicking off her heels and tucking her feet under her. The tension and excitement of the evening began to fade, replaced by a quieter intimacy. Can I ask you something? Sarah said. At dinner tonight, when people found out who you were, they got a little different, more deferential. Does that bother you? Marcus considered the question seriously. It used to bother me more. Now I mostly just find it tiring. It's hard to have genuine conversations when people are calculating what they can get from you. Is that why you were so careful about telling me your real name that first night? Partly, but also because I liked being just Daniel for a few hours. I liked having you see me as just a person instead of a net worth figure. Sarah reached over and took his hand. For what it's worth, I still see you as just a person who happens to have a lot of money but still just a person. That's one of the things I love about you, Marcus said quietly. The word hung in the air between them, charged with possibility and risk. Sarah felt her heart skip, but also a flutter of fear. Marcus, I know it's early to say that, he said quickly. I know this is all complicated, and we're still figuring things out, but I needed you to know. Sarah looked into his eyes, seeing the vulnerability there, the genuine emotion. I love you too, she said softly. It scares me how much I love you. The kiss that followed was different from the others they'd shared, deeper, more certain, filled with the weight of mutual confession. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Sarah made a decision. Stay, she whispered. Stay the night. This time, when they made love, it was with the knowledge of what they were to each other, the complications and possibilities all laid bare. It was tender and passionate and real in a way that made Sarah understand the difference between sex and intimacy, between attraction and love. Afterward, lying in Sarah's bed with Marcus's arms around her, she felt a contentment she'd never experienced before. This was what she'd been looking for without knowing it, not just passion or compatibility, but the sense of being truly known and accepted. What are you thinking about? Marcus asked, his voice drowsy. How weird life is. 6 weeks ago, I thought I knew exactly what my future looked like. And now I have no idea what comes next, and I'm okay with that. Marcus pressed a kiss to the top of her head. We'll figure it out together. The next few weeks brought a series of adjustments as they navigated their new relationship status. Sarah had to get used to the curious looks and whispered conversations that followed their public appearances together. Marcus had to learn to balance his natural inclination toward privacy with Sarah's more open approach to life. There were challenges, some expected and some surprising. The media attention was minimal but persistent. A few photos from the gala. Some speculation in the business press about Marcus Henderson's mystery girlfriend. Sarah found herself Googling herself for the first time in her life, cringing at some of the comments and speculation. More difficult were the reactions from some of Sarah's colleagues and friends. A few were genuinely happy for her, but others seemed to view her relationship with suspicion. Was she using Marcus for his money? Was he using her for his image? Had the Henderson Foundation grant been payment for sexual favors? I heard Jennifer talking about me in the break room yesterday, Sarah told Marcus over dinner at his apartment. She was saying how convenient it was that I found such a generous boyfriend right when we needed funding. Marcus's jaw tightened. What did you tell her? Nothing. What could I say? The timeline does look suspicious if you don't know the whole story. Do you want me to say something? Make it clear that the grant was approved before we started dating? Sarah shook her head. That would just make it worse. People are going to think what they want to think. But the gossip was harder to ignore than she'd expected. Sarah found herself second-guessing every interaction, wondering if people were talking to her because they respected her work or because they wanted access to Marcus. The breaking point came 3 weeks later, at a non-profit leadership conference, where Sarah was scheduled to speak on a panel about innovative funding models. She was in the bathroom before her presentation when she overheard two women talking at the sinks. I heard she was sleeping with him before the grant was even announced, one was saying. Must be nice to have such an effective fundraising strategy. I know, right? The rest of us have to actually write compelling proposals. Sarah stood frozen in the bathroom stall, her hands clenched into fists. She wanted to burst out and defend herself, but she also knew it would only make things worse. Instead, she waited until they left, then spent 10 minutes staring at herself in the mirror, trying to compose her face into something resembling professional calm. Her panel presentation went well, but Sarah's heart wasn't in it. She found herself wondering if her colleagues saw her as a serious professional or as Marcus Henderson's girlfriend who happened to run a non-profit. That evening, she was quieter than usual when Marcus picked her up from the conference. How did it go? He asked as they walked to his car. Fine. Good. The usual. Marcus glanced at her, clearly sensing something was wrong, but waited until they were seated at dinner to press the issue. Okay, what's really going on? You've been weird all evening. Sarah told him about the bathroom conversation, the persistent whispers, the way some people now seem to view her accomplishments through the lens of her relationship. I've worked so hard to be taken seriously in this field, she said, her voice tight with frustration, and now it feels like everything I've achieved is being attributed to who I'm sleeping with. Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. Sarah, anyone who actually knows your work knows that's ridiculous. You were successful and respected long before you met me. But it doesn't matter what people who know me think. It matters what potential donors think, what board members think, what other non-profit leaders think. If they see me as your girlfriend first and a professional second, then they're idiots who don't deserve your time or energy. Sarah pulled her hand free, frustrated by his dismissive tone. Easy for you to say. You don't have to worry about your professional reputation being reduced to who you're dating. You're right, Marcus said quietly. I'm sorry, that was insensitive. They finished dinner in relative silence, the tension between them palpable. In the car afterward, Marcus tried again. What can I do to help with this? Do you want me to be more public about the timeline of our relationship? Issue a statement about the grant process? God, no, that would just draw more attention to it. Then what? Sarah stared out the window at the Seattle streets passing by. I don't know. Maybe we need to be more careful about public appearances for a while. Keep things more private until the gossip dies down. She felt rather than saw Marcus's reaction to this suggestion. His hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel, but he kept his voice neutral. If that's what you think is best. But Sarah could tell he was hurt by the suggestion, and she felt terrible about it. This wasn't his fault any more than it was hers. They were both just trying to navigate an impossible situation. The next few weeks were difficult. They still saw each other regularly, but their dates moved from restaurants and public venues to Marcus's apartment and quiet walks in less popular neighborhoods. Sarah told herself it was temporary, just until the initial curiosity died down, but she could see the toll it was taking on their relationship. Marcus became more withdrawn, more careful with his words. The easy intimacy they'd developed began to feel strained, replaced by a politeness that hurt more than arguments would have. Things came to a head on a rainy Thursday evening in December. Sarah was at Marcus's apartment, supposedly helping him choose artwork for his new office, but really just going through the motions while they both pretended everything was normal. "What about this one?" Marcus held up a photograph of Mount Rainier at sunset. "It's nice," Sarah said without really looking. Marcus set the photograph down and turned to face her fully. "Sarah, we need to talk." The word sent a chill down her spine. In her experience, conversations that started that way never ended well. "About what?" "About this. About us. About the fact that we're both walking on eggshells and pretending it's sustainable." Sarah felt her defensive walls slam into place. "I don't know what you mean." "You don't want to be seen with me in public anymore. You flinch every time someone takes a photo or asks about our relationship. You're so worried about what people might think that you're not actually present when we're together." "That's not true," Sarah protested, but even as she said it, she knew he was right. "When's the last time you laughed, really laughed the way you did that first night?" Sarah couldn't answer that question, and they both knew it. Marcus sat down heavily on his couch, running his hands through his hair. "I understand why you're concerned about appearances. I really do. But I can't be in a relationship where I feel like a liability." "You're not a liability." "Then why do I feel like you're ashamed of me?" The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. "I'm not ashamed of you. I'm ashamed of what people think about me because of you. And you don't see how that's the same thing?" Sarah stared at him, the truth of his words sinking in slowly. She had been treating him like something to be hidden, something that reflected poorly on her, not because of who he was as a person, but because of what he represented to other people. "I don't know how to do this," she said quietly. "I don't know how to be with someone whose presence in my life changes everything about how people see me." "I don't know either," Marcus admitted. "But I know we can't keep pretending the problem doesn't exist." They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of unspoken possibilities hanging between them. Finally, Sarah spoke. "Maybe we should take a break, just for a while, until I figure out how to handle all this better." Marcus's expression went carefully blank. "Is that what you want?" "I don't know what I want anymore," Sarah said, hating how small her voice sounded. "I just know I can't keep living in this weird limbo where I'm constantly second-guessing every interaction, every appearance, every decision." "Okay," Marcus said quietly, "if that's what you need." The conversation that followed was painfully civilized. They agreed to take a month apart, no contact except for essential foundation business, which would be handled through Catherine anyway. Sarah would use the time to figure out what she wanted, how to handle the external pressures of their relationship. Marcus would. Well, he didn't say what he would do. Sarah gathered her things slowly, neither of them quite ready to make the separation final. At the door, Marcus caught her hand. "Sarah, I need you to know something. I don't regret any of this. Not meeting you, not falling in love with you, not any of it. Whatever happens." Tears spilled over despite her efforts to contain them. "I don't regret it either." The kiss goodbye was soft and lingering, tasting of tears and possibility and loss all at once. The next month was one of the longest of Sarah's life. She threw herself into work with renewed intensity, staying late at the office and filling her weekends with volunteer activities and social obligations. She told her concerned friends and colleagues that she and Marcus had decided to take things slow, that they were both too busy for a serious relationship right now. But the truth was harder to ignore in quiet moments. She missed him desperately, missed his laugh, his thoughtful questions, the way he listened to her talk about work. Missed the feeling of being truly known and accepted by someone who saw all of her, complicated ambitions and passionate convictions included. The holidays were particularly difficult. Sarah spent Christmas with her family in Vancouver, enduring her mother's pointed questions about why she hadn't brought Marcus and her father's gentle suggestions that she shouldn't let a good man get away because of what other people might think. "You know what your problem is," her younger sister Linda said on Christmas morning as they sat in their childhood kitchen, drinking coffee and watching the rain. "You care too much about what people think." "That's not true," Sarah protested automatically. "It totally is. You always have. Remember in high school when you wouldn't try out for the school play because you were worried people would think you were showing off? That was different. Was it? You've spent your whole life trying to prove that you deserve whatever good things come your way. But, Sarah, you do deserve good things. You deserve love and happiness and success, and you don't have to apologize for any of it." Sarah stared into her coffee mug, Linda's words hitting uncomfortably close to home. Maybe the problem wasn't other people's perceptions. Maybe the problem was her own insecurity, her own inability to believe that she could be worthy of someone like Marcus without there being some ulterior motive involved. New Year's Eve found Sarah at a house party in Capitol Hill, surrounded by friends and colleagues, but feeling profoundly alone. As midnight approached and couples around her began pairing off for the traditional kiss, Sarah slipped out onto the host's back deck despite the cold. The city sparkled below her, lights reflecting off the wet pavement and the waters of the Sound. Somewhere out there, Marcus was probably at some glittering party, surrounded by beautiful, accomplished people who didn't come with her particular set of complications. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, her heart leaped, thinking it might be from Marcus. Instead, it was from Jamie. "Hope you're having fun tonight. Can't wait to see what amazing things this year brings." As fireworks began exploding over the city and the sounds of celebration drifted from inside, Sarah made a resolution. She was going to stop letting fear make her decisions. She was going to stop apologizing for who she was and what she wanted, and she was going to call Marcus. But when she tried his number the next morning, it went straight to voicemail. She tried again that evening and the next day, with the same result. Either Marcus was avoiding her calls or he was out of town with no cell service. Sarah was debating whether to try calling his office when Jamie burst into her office with news that made her forget all about phone calls. "Sarah, you need to see this," Jamie said, practically vibrating with excitement. She thrust a copy of Seattle Magazine across Sarah's desk, open to an article titled "Pacific Northwest Philanthropy, the New Generation of Giving." Sarah scanned the article quickly, her eyes widening as she read. The piece profiled several local philanthropists and foundations, including a lengthy section on Marcus Henderson and the Henderson Foundation. But what made Sarah's heart race was the sidebar specifically about Seattle Youth Outreach and their innovative programs. The article praised their evidence-based approach, their impressive success rates, and their recent expansion plans. It quoted several other nonprofit leaders talking about Sarah's leadership and vision. Most importantly, it mentioned the Henderson Foundation grant only in passing, as one of several major funding sources they'd secured over the past year. "This is incredible," Sarah breathed. "I know, right? Look at the part about the housing program." Sarah read the highlighted section, which described their transitional housing model as groundbreaking, and quoted a city council member calling it exactly the kind of innovative approach we need to address youth homelessness at scale. "Jamie, this changes everything. With this kind of recognition, we could apply for federal funding, maybe even get congressional attention for the issues we're working on. I know I've already had 3 other organizations call this morning asking about partnerships." For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt genuinely excited about something other than her personal problems. This was what she'd been working toward for years, real recognition for their work, validation that their approach was making a measurable difference. But even as she celebrated with her staff and fielded calls from potential funders and partners, Sarah found herself wishing she could share the news with Marcus. He would understand better than anyone what this meant, both for her personally and for the kids they served. That evening, Sarah tried calling him again. This time, the phone rang several times before going to voicemail. "Marcus, it's Sarah. I know we agreed not to talk for a month, but I wanted to thank you. I think you might have had something to do with the Seattle magazine article, and if you did, thank you, it means more than you know." She paused, gathering courage. "I also wanted to tell you that I've been doing some thinking, and I realize I owe you an apology. I let my own insecurities make me treat you badly, and I'm sorry. Could we maybe talk when you get this message?" He didn't call back that night, or the next day, or the day after that. By the end of the week, Sarah was beginning to wonder if Marcus had changed his mind about wanting to work things out. The answer came on Friday afternoon, when Catherine Williams called the office. "Miss Chen, this is Catherine Williams, Mr. Henderson's assistant. I'm calling to inform you that Mr. Henderson will be out of the country for the next several months on business. He wanted me to assure you that the foundation grant will continue as scheduled, and that all future communications should go through my office." Sarah felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. "He's leaving for how long? I'm not at liberty to discuss Mr. Henderson's travel plans in detail. Is there anything specific regarding the grant that you need assistance with?" "No," Sarah said numbly. "No, everything's fine." After Catherine hung up, Sarah sat staring at her desk, trying to process what she'd just heard. Marcus was leaving Seattle, leaving the country for months. Without talking to her, without giving her a chance to apologize or explain or fight for what they'd had. The message was clear. He'd given up on them. Sarah made it through the rest of the workday on autopilot, going through the motions of meetings and phone calls, while her heart felt like it was breaking all over again. When she finally got home to her apartment, she poured herself a large glass of wine and allowed herself to cry. For Marcus, for what they'd almost had, for her own stubborn pride that had ruined the best thing that had ever happened to her. The next few weeks passed in a grey haze. Sarah functioned normally at work, even excelling as new opportunities opened up, thanks to the magazine article and the accompanying recognition. But personally she felt hollow, going through the motions of her social life without any real engagement. Her friends tried to cheer her up with girls' nights and blind dates and invitations to various social events. Sarah participated dutifully, but her heart wasn't in it. She'd had a taste of what real connection felt like, and everything else seemed pale by comparison. It was Jamie who finally confronted her about it, cornering her in the office kitchen on a rainy February afternoon. "Okay, enough," Jamie said, blocking Sarah's path to the coffee maker. "You've been moping around here for weeks like someone died. What's going on?" "I'm fine," Sarah said automatically. "You're not fine, you're miserable, and it's starting to affect your work. The Sarah I know would have been bouncing off the walls about the federal grant application, but you barely reacted when we got the approval to submit." Sarah sank into one of the uncomfortable chairs around the small table. "I messed up, Jamie. I had something good, something really good, and I let my own issues destroy it." "Are we talking about Marcus Henderson?" Sarah nodded miserably. "I was so worried about what people would think, so convinced that everyone would assume I was using him or he was using me, that I pushed him away. And now he's gone." "Gone how?" "Out of the country on business. For months, according to his assistant. He won't even take my calls." Jamie sat down across from her. "Sarah, can I ask you something? Do you love him?" "Yes," Sarah said without hesitation. "And when you were together, really together, were you happy? Happier than I've ever been in my life." "Then what the hell are you doing sitting here feeling sorry for yourself?" Sarah looked up, surprised by Jamie's blunt tone. "If you love him and he makes you happy, then who cares what a bunch of gossips think? So what if people talk, let them talk. You know the truth, he knows the truth, and anyone whose opinion actually matters will figure it out eventually." "It's not that simple." "It is that simple. You're making it complicated because you're scared. But Sarah, you face down city council members and federal bureaucrats and hostile journalists all the time. You've never let fear stop you from fighting for something you believed in before." Sarah stared at her assistant, realizing that Jamie was right. She'd spent so much time worrying about external perceptions that she'd forgotten to fight for what actually mattered. "You think I should go after him? I think you should do whatever it takes to fix this before it's too late." That evening, Sarah called Catherine Williams' office, hoping to get some information about when Marcus might return to Seattle. "I'm sorry, Ms. Chen, but as I mentioned before, I can't discuss Mr. Henderson's travel schedule. Could you at least tell me how to reach him? It's important. Mr. Henderson left specific instructions not to be disturbed, except for emergency business matters. Sarah felt her heart sink. I see. Could you at least give him a message from me? There was a long pause. I suppose I could pass along a brief message. Tell him Sarah called. Tell him I understand now and I'm sorry, and tell him... Sarah took a deep breath. Tell him I love him and I'm not giving up. Catherine's voice was noticeably warmer when she responded. I'll make sure he gets the message. But days passed without any response. Sarah began to wonder if Catherine had actually delivered the message, or if Marcus simply didn't care anymore. She was eating a lonely dinner at her kitchen table on a Thursday evening when her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, with an international country code she didn't recognize. Sarah? The connection was scratchy, but she recognized Marcus's voice immediately. Marcus? Oh my God, where are you? Nepal. I'm working with a group that builds schools in remote mountain villages. The cell service here is terrible, so I might cut out. Marcus, I've been trying to reach you for weeks. I got your message through Catherine about not giving up, but I wasn't sure. I needed time to think, Marcus said, and I needed to remember who I was before I had money, before I had to worry about whether people liked me for me or for what I could do for them. Sarah felt tears starting to spill over. I'm so sorry. I was an idiot, letting my own insecurities ruin everything we had. You weren't an idiot. You were scared, and you had legitimate reasons to be scared. I understand that now. Where does that leave us? The line crackled with static for a moment before Marcus's voice came through again. I'm coming home next week. Can we try again? Yes, Sarah said without hesitation. Yes, absolutely. It won't be easy. People will still talk. There will still be complications. I don't care, Sarah interrupted. I don't care what people say or think. I care about you, about us. Everything else is just noise. Sarah, I love you. I've loved you since that first night in the hotel bar, and I never stopped. I love you too, she said, crying openly now. I'm sorry it took me so long to realize that love is more important than fear. The connection cut out shortly after, but Sarah didn't mind. Marcus was coming home and they were going to try again. This time she was going to fight for what mattered. The week until Marcus's return passed slowly, but Sarah used the time productively. She had lunch with several of her colleagues, addressing the gossip and speculation directly instead of trying to hide from it. Yes, Marcus and I are together, she told them simply. Yes, the timing with the grant looked suspicious from the outside, but anyone who knows my work knows that I earned that funding based on merit, not personal relationships. Some people were supportive, others remained skeptical, but Sarah found that she genuinely didn't care as much as she'd expected. The work spoke for itself, and her integrity spoke for itself. Anyone who chose to believe otherwise wasn't someone whose opinion mattered anyway. Marcus called from the airport when his plane landed, his voice warm and tired and wonderful. I know it's late, but could I see you tonight? He asked. I'll be waiting, Sarah replied. She spent the hour before he arrived getting ready with more care than she'd taken in months. Not because she was worried about impressing him, but because she wanted to show him that she was fully present this time, fully committed to making this work. When Marcus knocked on her door, Sarah's heart jumped just like it had that very first night. She opened the door to find him standing there with a small smile and tired eyes, looking like he'd traveled halfway around the world to see her, which, she realized, he had. Hi, he said simply. Hi, she replied, and then she was in his arms, kissing him like her life depended on it. They held each other for a long moment, not talking, just reconnecting after months apart. I missed you, Marcus murmured against her hair. I missed you too, so much. They moved to the couch, sitting close together with their hands intertwined. Marcus told her about Nepal, about the schools they'd built and the children he'd met. Sarah told him about the magazine article, the new funding opportunities, the federal grant application they'd submitted. I'm proud of you, Marcus said when she finished updating him on her work. Not surprised, but proud. You're doing exactly what you were meant to do. I'm proud of you too. What you did in Nepal, using your resources to make a real difference. It's amazing. It helped me remember something important, Marcus said. Money is just a tool. It's what you do with it that matters. And what I want to do with mine is support people like you who are changing the world. Sarah looked into his eyes, seeing the same warmth and sincerity that had drawn her to Daniel in that hotel bar months ago. But now she also saw the wisdom that came from struggle, the depth that came from using privilege responsibly. So where do we go from here? She asked. Forward, Marcus said simply. Together if you want to, and this time we don't let other people's opinions dictate our choices. Together, Sarah agreed. Definitely together. The kiss that followed was a promise and a new beginning all at once. Outside, Seattle sparkled in the darkness, full of possibility and challenge and hope. 6 months later, Sarah stood at the podium in a packed auditorium at the University of Washington, delivering the keynote address at a national conference on youth homelessness. In the audience, she could see Marcus sitting in the third row, his face glowing with pride as she outlined the innovative approaches that Seattle Youth Outreach had pioneered. The young people we serve don't need our pity, Sarah concluded, echoing themes she'd developed over months of speaking engagements and media interviews. They need our investment, our belief in their potential, and our commitment to creating systems that actually work. When we provide stable housing, job training, and wraparound support services, we don't just change individual lives, we change communities. The applause was thunderous, and as Sarah made her way off the stage, she felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with external validation and everything to do with knowing she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. Marcus met her backstage with a bouquet of wildflowers, their tradition now, something beautiful and unpretentious that couldn't be bought at just any flower shop. "How did it feel up there?" he asked, pulling her close. "Like flying," Sarah said, stretching up to kiss him. "Like everything I've worked for is finally coming together." As they walked out of the auditorium together, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that night in the hotel bar. The external challenges hadn't disappeared. There were still people who whispered about their relationship, still complications that came with dating someone whose name appeared regularly in the business press. But Sarah had learned to distinguish between the opinions that mattered and the noise that didn't. The kids she served, the colleagues who respected her work, the family and friends who wanted her to be happy, those voices mattered. The rest was just background static that she'd finally learned to tune out. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus asked as they waited for their car. "Just how different everything is from a year ago. How different I am." "Different how?" Sarah considered the question. "Braver, I think. More willing to fight for what I want instead of hiding from what scares me." Marcus squeezed her hand. "I love brave Sarah, though I have to say, I fell in love with scared Sarah too." "Good thing," Sarah said with a laugh, "because I'm probably always going to be at least a little bit scared. But now I know that being scared doesn't have to stop me from living." As their car pulled up and they prepared to head home together, Sarah felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought them to this point. It hadn't been easy, and it probably never would be entirely easy. But it was real, and it was theirs, and it was worth every moment of uncertainty they'd endured to get here. The story that had started with one night, one drink, and one kiss recorded on the wrong phone had become something neither of them could have predicted. A love story that was also a story about courage, growth, and the willingness to fight for what mattered most. And as they drove through the Seattle streets toward home, Sarah knew that this was just the beginning of whatever came next. What did you think of Sarah's journey from heartbreak to finding true love while staying true to her values and mission? We'd love to hear about your favorite moment from this story in the comments below. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more incredible stories about love, growth, and second chances. More amazing tales are coming your way soon.